The host of Joe's Great Books is Joe Sharkey. He teaches at the University of Washington, Tacoma, but is not speaking for or sponsored by the UW.
Think of all those statues, those hulking statues of Zeus and of perfect Athena.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they had a high vision of the human, and Christianity wants to introduce sin and fallenness, and the idea that you're created by a God upon whom you depend 100% for your sustained existence. So
Yeah.
different affair. You're more like a reed blowing in the wind.
And you've got Zeus, who looks like
Yeah.
the perfect Olympian Arnold Schwarzenegger, and then you've got the crucified Christ.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you said it's like a reed blowing in the wind. It's like wind nailed to the reed. Theme song.
Fucking guy.
Do you have all the coughs out?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, no, but
Welcome to Joe's Great Books, episode 12, Aristotle, Artificial Intelligence, and my big brother Mike.
Hey, Joe.
For the first time, I have my very best teacher, lifelong, on the show with me, Mike. And I know, it's like being our mom, but anyway, very happy to have him here. He is a philosophy professor, actually an emeritus. Dick retired a couple of years ago. I'll be working for just another, say, quarter century until my kids are bloody out of college. Mike has written on Aristotle and Lonergan and Heidegger. And today, is that not true?
I haven't written on Aristotle.
Mike has written on Lonergan and Heidegger.
That's it.
And Harry Potter.
And AI, all right.
And sugar snack cereal. Anyway, he's
That's the way
taken up a new interest in artificial intelligence and found some interesting and, to me anyway, surprising connections with our boy Aristotle. So what we're going to do today is start off with a series of items that Mike thought were relevant about Aristotle, and then we'll move into a discussion of artificial intelligence, and I will pepper him with insightful questions, and stick around.
I should say I'm not interested in AI. Smeagol's hates it. I'm interested in criticizing it, but sure.
Do you want to do any kind of bio? Tell us, who you are and, what your heart is like.
Jesus.
Should we just skip it?
Yeah, let's skip it.
Skip it, nothing? Okay, you should probably tell them where you taught for umpteen years, right?
If you like, I taught at the University of Wisconsin in Platteville, small campus, the Wisconsin system. Decades. A lot good about it. Also happy to be done.
Way to play the game for me. So you want to get to Aristotle?
Yeah, I don't know if you know who this guy was, so I'll tell you. 4th century BC philosopher, student of Plato, tutor of Alexander the Great, polymath, a genius in many disciplines, not only in philosophy, world-class technical work in metaphysics, theory of knowledge, logic, ethics, but also outside of philosophy and poetics, political theory, rhetoric, and in the physical sciences, physics, biology, astronomy, and what we would call zoology, 2 huge books in the parts of animals. The farmers, he was empirical, despite what the modern scientists accuse him of, namely armchair speculation. He was empirical. So the farmers was always scared when they saw him coming. They knew he'd be poking around in their animals.
I'm going to interrupt all the time.
I
Sorry.
know.
That's just the way it goes. But one thing that is striking to my students when I talk about Aristotle, in the very rare cases that I do when I teach ancient Greek tragedy, I talk about the poetics. I don't know if you mentioned that, but he basically talks about everything. He's one of those guys that just thought that the whole world was his pursuit, and it would never have occurred to him apparently to specialize. Like if you were to tell him he was a polymath, he would probably have said, "No, I'm a philosopher," right?
No, I think that's too strong. I mean,
Oh, yeah?
he was just incredibly uncommon even among philosophers.
Okay.
If possible, he would say that everyone should inquire into everything, but I think he probably knew that few were, even among legitimate philosophers, few were capable of that. But yes, you should, even if you're limited to your specialization, you should to the degree that you can, attempt to see how it fits into an understanding of the whole. And for that, you'd have to go to Aristotle.
Okay, so for the last quarter century of students whom I said that to, it was wrong.
It was right. It was just uncareful, Joe. 'Cause you're not so smart compared to me. Joe's more smarter. We all know it.
Thank you very much.
Can I go now?
Onward.
Importantly, Aristotle's ideas in most of those areas were taken as gospel truth for 2 millennia by much of the Western world. I'll say that again. Most of Aristotle's ideas in most of those areas were taken to be true by most folks in the Western world for about 2 millennia, from the 4th century before Christ, when he was writing, and up through the 1600s, at which point Aristotle was crushed, or so people thought. The classical mechanists, Galileo and Newton, replaced Aristotle's physics and astronomy with extremely new and different physics and astronomy. And then in the 19th century, it was against at least residually Aristotelian strains in biology that Darwin was writing his theory of evolution. So although Aristotle was taken to be killed off in the modern and late modern period, he was wildly influential throughout most of the history of the West until that point. And even in the Middle East, lots of Arab philosophers, Avicenna, Averroes, other people were translating his works into medieval Latin. And then finally, most importantly for my purposes, St. Thomas Aquinas, the doctor of the Catholic Church, and the best philosopher ever to live, in my view.
Better than Lonergan.
Well, Lonergan updates Aquinas, but Aquinas thought this stuff. But maybe the truth is that, I think Aquinas was the most correct philosopher, but Aristotle was probably his greatest. Aquinas is often said merely to have baptized Aristotle. Aquinas took pagan learning, secular learning, dead seriously, and was utterly devoted to Aristotle. Aristotle constitutes, I think you could say, the core of Aquinas's work in philosophy. And it was Aquinas's genius to blend secular learning with so-called revealed truth, and to
revealed truth.
Say that.
Gloss that for us. Revealed truth.
Truth revealed through sacred scripture. Right. So
Okay.
Aquinas was a monk and a theologian, I suppose primarily, but produced the theology he did as a result of blending what he took to be pagan truth, Aristotle, with so-called revealed truth, or the truths to which you can come by a combination of receiving God's gift of grace and reading revealed texts like those of the Old and New Testament. The Muslim philosophers, I think, did not take it that far in their own area, but they were as devoted, or almost as devoted, to Aristotle at the level of philosophy.
So tell me if I've got this wrong too, but my understanding is that Augustine and Aquinas believed that you could understand almost everything, but ultimately you could say nothing about creation by studying creation without revealed truth, without knowing Christ. And so they understood the world by analyzing it, by using their spark of divinity, their reason, to understand right and wrong, the world around them, but they didn't know Christ. So I'm wrong on that too?
No, I certainly don't think even Augustine, certainly not Thomas, but I don't think that even Augustine would have said that we can learn almost nothing about the world apart from revelation.
No, I mean in the absolute sense. If you can get all the way up to maybe a high percentage of knowledge, of all available knowledge, just by using your reason, by examining the world, by reflecting. And in so doing, you are, in some sense, reading the mind of God. But if Christ hadn't been revealed to you, that would be a big stumbling block in both, in Augustine's mind and Aquinas's, wouldn't it? I'm the way and the truth and the light, and the door.
It would prevent you from full understanding. But we wouldn't want to cash these things out in terms of percentages. But yes, I just want to say flatly that Aquinas, at least, and I think some of the Arabs would have thought that, I would use the phrase, most of human life in the universe can be understood by way of secular learning, namely the learning of the Greeks. But that then, in order to perfect that and to come to a spiritual awareness as well as a straightforwardly cognitive one, you should become a converted heart and avail yourself of God's gift of grace and revealed truth. It's true that for people in the Aristotelian tradition, I think both Muslim and Christian, or what we would now call Catholic, it's true for all of those folks. I think that conversion of heart and faith are the most important thing. But I would not want to say the sorts of things that a Protestant would, namely that, by comparison with what learns as touched by faith, you have very little to the contrary.
Okay. No, I actually prefer that way of putting it. I have to admit, I'm thinking of Dante. And so in the Inferno, Dante has this portion of hell, the Inferno, called limbo. And I'm using I have the John Chardy translation in mind. So if you read in a different translation, the terms might differ, but I think it's Chardy's title, the Virtuous Pagans. And among these is Virgil, who escorts Dante, the pilgrim, through all of the Inferno and through much of Purgatorio before he has to yield to Beatrice, who, of course, is saved because she was a Christian. And it's one of the heartbreaking moments when Virgil has to hand Dante off like a baton to Beatrice, because he has to go back down toward the center of the earth to reside forever in a kind of it's a kind of damnation, even though the Dante seems to go as soft as he feels he possibly can, because they don't suffer any pain. There's no punishment, but there are two things they lack. One is light. All of hell is supposed to be dark, no light, because God is light, and hell is the absence of God. But they do, fascinatingly, they do kind of generate their own light, because by their own reason. So they're producing their own light, but it's still dim.
Comparatively.
Yes, comparatively. Before I was being, when I said in a sense they have nothing, all I mean is that in a sense, if you don't have God or you don't have the Christian faith, at least some Christian thinkers would say you have nothing. Seems to me you're resisting that when you talk about Aristotle, or not Aristotle, when you talk about, say, Augustine or Aquinas' view of Aristotle. The other thing that they don't have also is hope, because in Dante's cosmology, they're never getting out.
Right. Look, I fear you're collapsing two things here, because you are, again, such a dumb guy. The question how much can be known outside of faith is different from the question, are those without faith damned? And
Yes.
your portrait of what Dante says may well be accurate to Dante. I don't myself necessarily accept that doctrine when it comes to an updated Aquinas. You have more traditional Catholic instincts, and I more progressive ones. Sorry to say, but I hoped to avoid that whole question whether Aquinas thinks that there's any kind of salvation outside of Christ. I mean, it looks like he did deny that, but on an updated version of Aquinas, that is to say, Aquinas, who is no longer relying on pagan physics, biology, and astronomy, but on contemporary physics, biology, and so on. On the account of an updated Aquinas, one who takes contemporary science as seriously as Thomas took ancient science, I think you can come up with accounts of what is necessary for salvation. But if you don't mind, I would like to set that aside, not just for political reasons, but because I am absolutely not tutored in theology.
Sure, thank you. I appreciate that, and I like the idea of an updated Aquinas. And in case anybody's wondering, that doctrine has always been a sticking point for me. And I guess in some ways I might have more traditional instincts than you. In other ways I don't. I haven't done a podcast on Julian of Norwich yet, but I look forward to doing that. Maybe we could talk about her, the revelations. And she keeps kind of beating her head against the brick wall of church doctrine, and seems to me always sincerely to bow down to it and say, I'm just a humble, uneducated woman. What do I know? Holy Church is always and everywhere, correct? And I don't believe that she's doing it because she's afraid.
Nope.
I think she just believes that, and she was that profoundly humble. But she can't help, in a way that always reminds me of our mother, to say, this seems harsh to me, that you can't be saved if you don't know Christ. And she specifically talks about pagans and Muslims. And then she says, but what do I know? One thing I trust is that all will be well.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm rooting for. But I always try to, I tell my students to play the author where it lies, like a golf ball, and try to, on step one, figure out what the author meant or took himself to mean, or what the book means. But I like the idea of you saying, okay, but if we understand what he meant then, and then you, in a sense, fast forward him into time and imagine what those principles would have led him to conclude if he had lived for another, I don't know what, in Aristotle's case, 2,400 years. then he might have thought something different, or Aquinas or Augustine the same way. So anyway, I like that, and I didn't mean to bog us down. Maybe we'll cut that shit out.
No, please
Go
leave it
for
in. No, it's utterly important, and I shouldn't hide from it. But for pedagogical reasons, I often don't bring it up until later. And I have to admit that even on updated Thomist accounts, there's just terrific disagreement about that matter and about how even to understand it. I am, however, happen to learn that you're loosey-goosey liberal on the issue. Just kidding. Go ahead.
Tito, I did my best.
Yeah, you're gonna have to confront Tito.
It's on tape. You'll never escape. Okay, so on with your little lecture thing.
That's right. So fundamental to Aristotle's understanding of reality, including what we would narrowly call physical reality, is the idea that all natural motion is directed to an end, telos in Greek, telos, which, if it's achieved, fulfills the being whose motion is always drawn unto it. The teleological understanding of the cosmos and of nature was taken to be slaughtered by the modern scientists, early and late modern scientists I mentioned before. And as a result, ever since, most college-educated people, so-called, have felt sure that there's no such thing as an inbuilt orientation to term, a natural directedness towards some end or goal or purpose, which, if it's achieved, fulfills the being whose motion is at issue.
Okay, so an inbuilt motion to term. Term in the sense of like terminality.
You've already got motion, so but the idea is that in all motion, in all natural motion, there's an inbuilt orientation to term.
Okay, so in all motion,
a directedness towards.
Everything is purposeful. It's not random. It's not chance. It's not purely up to individual will. Am I reading too much in here?
No, that's certainly right, but it's dangerous to use the word purpose because people, being modern people, feel sure that purpose amounts to screwing up your courage and forcing yourself towards some arbitrarily chosen end. For Aristotle, purpose is, as I think you meant, something given
yes.
in the nature of things and not cooked up by you. But yes, that's the point.
Purpose, you are what you are. You were made what you are, and you can only become either a better version of that or a worse version of that. Is that fair?
Again, I'm going to quibble a little bit. For plants and animals, you are who you are, and you will automatically make good on that inbuilt orientation so long as you don't, so long as there's enough light and soil and nutriment and water for the plant, and then so long as the cat doesn't fall off a cliff and for once die. But because human beings are different, they're not just animals. They're sure as shit not plants, but neither are they just animals. They're rational animals, and they have not only minds but free wills. And so it is up to them to cooperate with their inbuilt orientation to term. And of course, they may elect or choose not to cooperate, in which case they will never fulfill their nature. So yes, the purpose, the telos, the goal is given by nature for Aristotle. Human beings, at least, won't automatically end up developing unto it. They have to cooperate with an inbuilt orientation.
Which is exactly what I said.
Okay. Just one, but you keep there. I mean, I know from decades of teaching this stuff that if you use a word that modern people use, they will misunderstand. Like purpose.
Yeah.
So
no, I'm fucking around. You should absolutely correct me. Mike is a trained philosopher.
Oh.
I dabble in philosophy, and so I'm often imprecise, and I don't know the resonance of the words. And in a way, I think that helps me teach my students who are in literature classes. And I may be wrong, but I'm hoping I'm giving it to them in a way that is kind of rough cut, but will, hit home. But it's possible that I'm actually not hitting home because I'm using words that from experience will mislead them based on the difference between the ancient or medieval and the modern mind, which is something we talk about. So anyway, this is a good tutorial for me, and that's why I want you on the show. So smack me around.
It's generous and I appreciate it. It is fun for once to know a tiny bit more.
Smack me around.
But I know from all kinds of reliable sources that you've had tons of success with your students, and I honestly think I had almost none.
I'm definitely cutting that out. Go ahead.
No, leave it in. It's the truth. Why otherwise am I in part justified in being in a bad mood and kind of disheveled and broken down? Leave me the excuse.
That's right. Just because you're old.
Shut up. Some people think that teleology is coming back in physics and biology. My sister, who's a trained nurse and who's studied a lot of biology and chemistry, has for decades now told me that you can observe in the phenomena, of physical science, a directedness toward an orientation to a development thereunto, some more perfect version, among elements of the periodic table, the development of the fetal eye. In other words, my sister Mariah, who's very sharp and a good person, but has never read Aristotle, says that in today's physical sciences, it's just manifest that nature is not merely matter in motion, with particles and subatomic particles, randomly assembling in the aggregate or banging around, but that there could be observed in their motion what we in an anthropomorphic way are driven to call purpose, purposiveness, orientation towards some given perfection, which, although natural in the sense of hardwired in as a possibility, isn't natural in the sense of given. It has to be achieved by folks and developed unto by even natural beings lower than us or we. Right, now don't say anything. So, leaving aside all the debates about whether Aristotle is or is not a dead dog when it comes to his teleological picture of nature, because I'm so convinced of that, it matters less to me than another doctrine of Aristotle's, or a point Aristotle makes, which amounts to a distinction between two kinds of human action. I'll say what they are, say how one seems to me merely to play a supportive role in human life, and the other to be what it's all for, how contemporary life in the West entirely ignores or even denies the reality of the important kind of action and tragically embraces the first terrifically less valuable sort, or if you like, losing our souls or ending up unfulfilled and perhaps, if the more traditional portrait of God is right, in bad trouble. But I think that now the preeminent tool of that kind of acting and living is AI. So I say that all now as an anticipation of the AI stuff if we get to it tomorrow.
Just to be clear, the AI is the culmination of the inferior sort
Of action.
of action. Okay, good. Just to make sure.
I'd be happy now. Now I'm going to get into some details. I'd be happy if you wanted to say anything right now in case you want to.
Can I just like wait until you're in a groove and then throw you off?
Yeah, that's fine.
Fire one ready.
All right. Undergirding Aristotle's account of a teleological universe in which natural motion is oriented to some end, which, if it's achieved, constitutes a kind of fulfillment of the nature of the thing in question. Undergirding all of that, at least with respect to human action, to human journey unto fulfillment, is a distinction between two kinds of action, two kinds of human action. I'm not going to get into the Greek terms because, frankly, the distinctions here still mystify me. And I should say that I am not an Aristotle scholar. My boss for many years was a guy named Shane Drewsinski, who would, publish articles in Oxford Ancient Studies, Greek philosophy, and so on. He would throw up at this shot from the hip account of Aristotle. But here goes anyway, because, of course, it can be helpful for those of us who aren't flipping scholars.
Hi, Shane.
Yeah, Shane, you'll never watch. All right. I hope. Two kinds of action. For my money, this has been the most important thing in Aristotle for me. Aristotle's distinction between two kinds of human action. Again, I'm going to leave out the Greek terminology. Let's talk about it this way. The first sort of action is, Aristotle says, action whose end lies external to it. The second sort of action is action whose end lies somehow internal to it. Let me put it another way. The first sort of action is instrumental action, if you like. Action understood as a tool or instrument for achieving something which lies beyond it. The second sort of action is not instrumental. It is not a means to an end, but an end in and of itself. That's what he means when he says that this kind of action, that the end of this kind of action lies somehow internal to it. All right, so if the first kind of action is means end action, strategic action, instrumental action, action which is taken up only for the sake of getting at something else. If that's true of the first kind of action, the second kind of action runs in exactly the opposite direction, or is just opposite in kind. It is action taken up for its own sake. It is not a means to something else. It is an end in and of itself. If you like, the first kind of action is of merely extrinsic worth or value, whereas the second kind of action is of intrinsic worth or value. It is not pursued for the sake of something else. It is pursued for its own sake. Anything quick about the distinction?
Not yet. I want to come back to it, but it would take a while, so just keep going. Very interesting. Onward.
The very idea that some things are pursued for their own sake or that they are ends in and of themselves, of course, makes sense only if there are such things as teloi, right? Ends of intrinsic value. Without teleology, you can't have the second kind of action, and you have instead a mechanistic universe in which human action, if there is indeed anything more than response to stimulus, is at best a kind of tool or instrument which cranks out certain results that are desirable depending upon your arbitrary choice. All right, what are some examples? The two examples of, well, the next thing I want to say is this, that according to Aristotle, the first kind of action, technical action, strategic action, instrumental action, is, of course, very important in a human life. Without it, we couldn't get on. But compared to the other kind, it plays at best a supportive role. And the second kind of action is really what it's all for, right? It's that we really care about, that for which we live and die, for real. And without it, life would be at best animal and maybe even sub-animal. So, dumping the teleological understanding of the universe has huge consequences because I think it's false and not true to human nature. Human beings never really fully mark the devastating character of those consequences. I'm getting off topic. Let me go back. The two examples of instrumental action or technical action, the kind that is of lesser importance in a human life, according to Aristotle. Some examples of that kind of lesser action that leap to mind are these: money making. You punch the clock so that you can get some money, and you get some money not for its own sake, but for the sake of the stuff it can get you. And there's nothing wrong with that. But money making is certainly means and action. Very few people seek to amass money just for its own sake. I mean, if they do, I don't think I would even count that as teleological action, but stupidity. But if or impoverished judgment of value. But certainly in a legitimate way, much of us in the Western world spend much of our lives making money for the sake of something else, means and activity, instrumental activity. Nothing wrong with it, but it plays merely a supportive role. And also, the other one that leaps to mind, maybe because I commuted for decades, is transportation. Very few people are into moving through space and time for its own sake. Transportation gets us from here to there. It's means and activity. And again, utterly important as a kind of setup of real life. The second kind of action, the kind which is not instrumental, not means end, but an end in and of itself, its own end, something we seek out and cultivate for its own sake. The kind that we really care about, if we're honest about it, shows up in different sorts of activity, not money making so much, and not in transportation, but in things like friendship, love relation, family relation, relationship to the divine, if there is any. That caveat I had to insert for decades. Relationship to the divine, art, and sport. And I would now like to take a few minutes to explain how each of those examples really is an example of action pursued for its own sake, fitting into a teleological understanding of things, and that without which we have no reason to live. But before I get to all that, anything yet?
It's a couple of things that, again, I'm philosophy adjacent, not a philosopher, but it does seem to me that I always have this impression of Aristotle when I go back to Aristotle. Like when I teach the Poetics, and he says stuff like, every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. When he says his most profound things, I have a two-step reaction. One, no shit, or everyone knows that. And two, how fortunate it was that we had someone with a mind like Aristotle's, so long ago that, at least from our perspective, 2.5 millennia since, it feels like, he was the first guy to draw on the inkboard, or the first person to skate on the perfect ice, and that other people could have said it's very far astray or on the wrong path, and maybe they did, and they just wore away over the years. But the kinds of things you just said, I think almost everybody has a profound intuition of that. There are things worth doing. They have the character of depth. They're not easy. They're not light. They're not always happy. And you go from transportation to family or friendship. Your friends, your brothers piss you off, but it's a relationship you would die for, and it's good in and of itself, but it doesn't make it easy, it doesn't make it fun, at least not always. But when it is fun, it's fun built on a profundity of meaning and import, and then you have fun on top of that. So it's so fun for me to hear it explained in a systematic fashion. And I have other things, but I don't want to push you too far off course.
No, I appreciate it, and I'm very grateful for it. And I quite agree that when people hear things like that every story has a beginning, and a middle, and an end, they instinctively understand it correctly, because of course they are human. But no sooner do they get educated, especially in more recent philosophy, then do they dump it or feel compelled to dump it, until they realize that it's unlivable and fall back into the truth again. But every modern philosopher will tell you, and practically every natural scientist, pretty much every so-called educated person in the last 600 years will say, listen, make sure you understand that there actually is no such thing as an end in Aristotle's sense. Does every story have a beginning and a middle and an end? Well, of course, because we live in time and we like to impose order on things and pretend that there's some sensible narrative to our lives. But be sure and realize that these ends are either just ends in the sense of finishes, fulfillments, or and termini.
Stoppings.
Yes, or ends in the sense of goals or purposes which are arbitrarily chosen. Okay? I mean, I'm tempted to say that is the single most insisted upon comment in modern times in the West, that any ends to stories are not ends in the sense of fulfillments, uh, of inbuilt orientation or purpose. They are merely ends either in the sense of, yes, stoppings, or in the sense of goals, purposes, arbitrarily chosen, or chosen from out of whimsy or subjective preference instead of objective ends prescribed by nature, if you're Aristotle, and ends prescribed by God, if you're some kind of believer. Good?
Yeah, it's great. For me, it's so useful because you think of things like, okay, what's the difference between, say, dieting and fasting?
Yeah.
And it's all the world.
Now dieting is fasting. Rob Lowe fasts.
Right. So, well, and the other thing is just that
I'm kidding. Go ahead.
I get this in literature. I didn't get the joke at first, but I get it now. I had this reaction constantly about my tribe, which is literature, which is just what you might call the stupidity of sophistication, and this kind of relentless desire to sound smart,
Yeah.
and not to apprehend something simple and true, and just appreciate it. Instead, the idea is, no, you have to be smarter than that, and so you have to make it complex. And I think in literature, I think it's because we flunked out of calculus, and so we couldn't be engineers or do real science, and so we're constantly trying to convince ourselves that we're really smart, and so we make up all these abstruse things that push people away from literature. And it's like the price of admission. If you don't know deconstruction or any number of the other postmodern isms, that you're not really understanding it in a sophisticated way. And as I've said since the first podcast, I think that's bullshit. When the best writers get over that hump, and they know all the most hyper sophisticated arguments on both sides or all sides of an issue, they kind of break free and they become simple again. And they write in a way that's not strutting, that's not showing off, and that's not hard to understand. They get to the most difficult and they make it as comprehensible as possible. And I call that good teaching. But maybe I'm projecting more about literature scholars than philosophers. But it seems that there's a constant scorn, a constant disdain, a kind of elitism that rubs them or sets them against anything that is simple and pure and clear and accessible to everybody.
I think I agree if we make a distinction.
Sure.
This is amusing because Joe is so much sharper than I am. And so it's funny that
So you keep saying.
it's funny that he keeps Joe's first book, which you should all read, was what I would call a defense of common sense.
Only book.
And of course, I agree with it in the sense that people by nature, simple people who haven't been, made sophisticated, so-called, by education, understand that Aristotle's right. Yes, part of so-called education these days means becoming unduly sophisticated about everything, and in particular, cynical. That's why I'm so cynical about education. So on all of that, I agree with Joe. And yet, I would want to say, maybe he would agree, maybe he wouldn't. I would want to say that while common sense is entirely adequate for a good life and certainly salvation, there is higher learning certainly in the natural sciences, maybe even in the human sciences, and in perhaps not in the writing of literature, but in theorizing about literature and in philosophy. Long story short, I have myself become modern enough to think that a terrifically differentiated consciousness, a mind which is capable of making many distinctions with great detachment, rigor, and patience, is necessary for getting at the full truth. Modern or 20th century science, not only relativistic physics and quantum mechanics, but 20th century science has revealed I would argue, the wild complexity of the universe, such that to really understand it, and so to blend Aquinas with contemporary secular learning, requires a terrific sophistication. So while I do think that it is still important for people who are called to do research and theory to become terrifically sophisticated, not needlessly and not cynically, but terrifically sophisticated, while I do think that is necessary, I sure as shit don't think it means that less differentiation, less sophistication makes for a less good or holy life. I would want to distinguish two kinds of life. To call one commonsensical and the other theoretical is inadequate to both. But I think that they are equally important for the culture, however different they are, and that no one person needs to feel called to do both, and that they are. Yeah, it's not as if one is more sufficient for a good individual life or more sufficient for salvation than the other.
I will think about it, and I think by the time I'm done thinking about it, I will consider myself corrected.
Well, a lot of people far smarter than I, and in particular conservatives, reject this and think that while modern science does require a terrific sophistication, it remains the enemy of a holy life, which ought to be simple, not in the sense of simplistic. Even God is simple in that sense, according to Aquinas. So I might even be willing to say it's more important to achieve that simplicity um, than to become sophisticated or differentiated. But we might have a real disagreement about that at the end of the day, and that's fine. But Plato and Aristotle were never better friends, I think, than when they were looking at the good and disagreeing about it.
Yeah.
I don't mean here that it's all relative or subjective. No, I just mean that no one should expect to get at the full truth in this life, and so there are going to be disagreements, founded on even wonderfully shared, genuine understanding.
Yep. One of the premises of the podcast. So that's why you and other guests are here. Excellent. So onward.
All right. Let me go through each of the examples that I gave of the second kind of action, the important kind. Action which is pursued for its own sake and can't be taken up as a means to an end without being ruined. Okay, friendship. If you're friends with a guy just because you'd like to be in the popular crowd in which he runs, you're not really friends with the guy. You're using him. You're making of him a tool or an instrument with which to attain to something beyond the friendship. Instead, the right question, why are you friends with Tom Arostegui, is because I value the friendship with Tom Arostegui. It would require a profound and almost mystical intelligence and expressive capacity to try and say what all that amounts to. And I'm happy to think that it can't be fully expressed. But
You're a Steggy Blast.
that's right, my buddy from my youth. It is of value for its own sake and not for the sake of some. I mean, does Arostegui give me joy? Does he sometimes pay for my dinner? Right, and that's okay. But it's absolutely not what it's centrally about. And if it were about something else, it would not be the real article.
Christopher Hitchens in a clip that we both like and are ashamed to like, very deliberately sexist clip about who's funnier, men or women, talks about how he thinks that men had to develop a sense of humor or evolutionary means in order to reproduce and get the woman to, as I think he puts it, surrender. But that's not very nice. Humor by itself is a kind of play. And it's a kind of joy, and it's one of the things I would say is the most pure example of the second form of, is it behavior, is that word, or action? Action that we have, and that you're doing it just for the joy of it, just the fun of it, right? So I thought that was a particularly stark differentiation between the two modes of action.
Really good. I would include that under art, but yeah, humor is a super good example. Although, as I bet you would agree, when you say just for the joy of it or the fun of it, you both mean that because some humor is intentionally silly and low level. But I think you would also say that the humor, the delight, the joy can be quite profound.
Yeah, it's that fun on top of the
Yes.
profundity of the relationship. But you're not trying to get the other person you're yucking it up with to sleep with you, which was Hitchens.
And Hitchens
Hilarious point.
did tie it to a Darwinian understanding, not just of biological development, but of human being, right? And this is so constant today, and people are so pathetically proud of it. But the point, I think, was, look, we're all animals attempting to satisfy our appetites because that's what we're hardwired to do, and animals avail themselves of whatever advantages they have, since men are so horribly ugly, as Hitchens correctly pointed out. They have no chance of finding mates, let's say, unless they can compensate for their aesthetic horror with humor. And maybe this is
He was
wrong.
projecting.
Well,
He didn't know what it was like to be gorgeous.
he looked pretty damn good in that video, but that's because he lost the 60 pounds that I have.
Well, because he was funny.
Well, he looked good too, just
Good,
aesthetically, I think. But anyway, I mean, he's dreamy. But listen,
Back to your thing.
love relation. You know, if you love your wife or marry just because you'd like her money, you don't love your wife. You're not actually married in the real sense. It is not a love relation, but a manipulative relation, an instrumentalization of something which can't be instrumentalized lest it be destroyed. Instead, you love your wife. This could be misunderstood, but because you love your wife, or she seems to be of intrinsic value to you, the relationship seems to be of intrinsic value to you. Whatever the incredibly wonderful perks, of which there are many in my case, limitlessly many, because I really married up. Family relationship, as Joe said, you know, same thing. If you love your mama just because she makes you look good to your uncles, you don't love your mama. And what a lesser and ugly and stupid and unsatisfying affair it would be if you loved your mama merely for some external reason. No, you love your mama because she is, and the loving of her is of intrinsic value. And, you know, even if you don't have any money or you don't have any good transportation, that utterly sustains you. As it has, especially in the case of Joe and me, because we certainly have the most wonderful and loving human being who's ever lived for a mother. What is it? Friendship, love relation, family, relationship to God, if there is any. Uh, you know, if you follow the dictates of a religion or participate in the sacraments and festivals of atonement and all that, characteristic of some particular faith, because you want to get into heaven, you can, as my brother once said, I think you can be sure that's the one place you will never go. You cannot be mercenary with God. It is a flipping commonplace, I think, especially, frankly, among evangelical Christians, that the whole point is to get your ass in heaven, to get saved. It's a straightforwardly selfish interest. And if you say, Jesus, if there's an instrument by which you can achieve that, you have to sincerely say some words. That is, you know, my wife teaches at a Protestant school, and everyone, certainly it's true of her and everyone else I have met there, that what I just sketched is in no way true of them. But folks I've met, frankly, of a less educated sort in the evangelical world, seem to me to be, frankly, mercenary about it. And like I say, I'm pretty sure that in that way they will achieve the opposite of what they intend, because it is an ugly, immoral, stupid, sinful uh, degradation of religious action, faith, love, charity. Participation in the rites of a religious community is a terrible degradation of all of that to cast it in merely instrumental terms. And I think almost all Orthodox, you know, religious texts would tell you this, and that it's unsurprising that a more recent modern version of Christianity has become so happily mercenary. Now, you know, as soon as I imagine what Protestants will be thinking when they hear me say this stuff, I realize that it is, you know, totally obviously true that the Catholics started it, you know, with the indulgences and so on, and you know, of course, in less advanced kinds of Catholicism, you do have what the Protestants don't caricature in describing us, you know, namely the idea that if you heard it together with a bunch of other people, listen to a guy give you rules and obey the damn rules mindlessly and heartlessly, then you're getting into heaven. You know, follow some rules, and then you're in. Too tired to do anything else, and you know, it's already heroic that you're coming to church on Sunday because you're missing football. All right, let me finish. Religion, sport, and art. Think about it, man. Sport, you know, is at least in its truest form, not instrumental action. It's the best athletes, the athletes who are the truest athletes do pursue it for the love of the game, and I don't mean by that the trophy or the adulation. In the that movie, what the hell was it called? Guys are running in slow motion beautifully in England.
Chariots of Fire.
Yeah, you know, those guys are running for. I've never seen the movie, but it sure shit looks like they were running. They were doing it for the love of the game, at least, and maybe for the love, for the greater glory of God. Joe's favorite philosopher Wittgenstein implies that if he weren't such a compromised person, he would like to say that he's written this book for the greater glory of God. That he puts it that way is probably proof that he did it.
Can I give you an example about sport?
Please.
It's way off topic, but there's this one moment, and it probably 20 years ago now, where, and I was a Minnesota Vikings fan until I eventually just tapped out. Said, no more pain, I quit. So I don't really watch pro anymore. And one of the Vikings' big rivals back then was Brett Favre, spelled Favre. hilariously. And he was a very good player, a lot of moxie. And, he's, since he retired, maybe hasn't acquitted himself quite as well in certain ways, but he did seem to play like a kid. And he loved the game.
That's right.
And I know that it sounds so cliche when you talk about he loved the game, or they respect one another's games. I remember I said that once and you cringed about tennis players, but rightly so. But anyway, there's this one very intense game, and I don't remember what it was about, playoff game or maybe like to get into the playoffs. And the Packers were playing the Giants. And if I recall correctly, Michael Strahan, who's like a TV personality now, he, I think, was closing in on the all-time sack record. And he's a defensive lineman, huge, hulking, but super athletic guy who tackles the quarterback. That's a sack. And so he was playing against Favre, who's the quarterback, so he's the sackee. And throughout the game, Strahan got him a couple times. Most of the time, he would, Favre would just get the ball off just before he sacked him. And there was one time when Strahan, as I recall, he sacked Favre and he got him hard, like really slammed him to the ground, as defensive linemen are wont to do. Favre jumps up, and he's a big guy, but he's much smaller than Strahan. And he runs up to Strahan, he gets right in his face, and he's like this, and you can't tell what's going on. And he's like gesticulating his face like that, and you don't know what. And the announcers were all saying, wow, look at Favre, he's really heated, he's really fired up. I wonder what he thinks Strahan did wrong, because it was a totally clean sack. It was just hard. Football's a rough game. And I could tell in that moment. Brett, if you're out there, or Michael, if you're out there, tell me if this is right. I feel very confident that what he was doing at that moment, and you could tell by the body language, and I don't remember what he did. I don't think he ever slapped him on the shoulder, but I think it was kind of like that.
Yeah.
And he was basically saying, isn't this awesome?
Yeah.
You and I are going at it. You're trying to sack me.
Yeah.
I'm trying not to get sacked. You got me that time, bitch, but I'm going to come at you next time. I'm throwing a touchdown next. And he's just like, come on, bring it on. Let's do it again. Let's play. Let's elevate ourselves. And that's all the Rocky Eye of the Tiger, rising up to face the challenge of your rival, I think is the immortal line. And it was fun to watch that. It was so fun. And I don't even remember who won the game, but it was super fun. And, I love both guys at that moment. And there are moments in MMA where guys will just wail on each other, really literally trying to knock the other guy out and hurt the other guy. And sometimes they'll, hit each other so hard and they'll both kind of fall back at a certain point. And every once in a while, they can't do it too much because it's become cliche there too. But every once in a while, they'll just stop and they'll reach out and they'll just touch gloves.
Yeah.
Like, nice effing shot. That one got me.
And at the end, when they touch, like the Irish freak, the guy who seems more vainglorious than any human ever lived, McGregor. Yeah. I saw him just last night on the TV after he, strutted and killed the guy like a satanic. He touched at the end. He looked over and the guy was, hanging there, and he touched his glove. And I swear to Christ, I felt sure it was genuine.
No, I totally believe with McGregor. McGregor he's all about that. But that's the thing. They understand it and they know that they're trying to kill each other. But then when the whistle stops, they're like, okay, you were trying to kill me. That means you knew I was trying to kill you.
Yes.
We went out here in front of all these people. We did that. We put our lives on,
Yes.
literally lives on the line. It's like two gladiators and they say, I hate everything about you, but you and I are eagles. So you're an eagle. You earned my respect. That's what they mean by respect.
All right. But I would, with respect, I worry that, that has the tinge of something less than I hope is going on there. Tell me if you disagree. Look,
they're martial,
isn't it? Right, but what I want to say that this is militating against is that it's so joyous and satisfying because it's an act of self-transcendence. You care more about the excellence of the play than you do about getting the credit. That's why it's less important to you that a guy just stuck you than it is that this is real play. And, Joe and I also like a philosopher named Gadamer, who has this doctrine of spiel, play. Yeah. And he says that in athletics, the highest performance is characterized not so much by play, but by being played. There's a way, you watch the Borg and McEnroe shit from the 70s, and it really does look like, the distinction between certainly Borg and his racket, or even Borg and McEnroe breaks down, and there's this excellent, beautiful flow, which is carrying these guys along to some degree above their own heads. That is self-transcendence. And when you are played by the work of art, or by the humor, or by the sport, when you are taken up in something larger, ride the wave of something which exceeds you, paradoxically, the satisfaction is much greater than if you're just trying to accommodate your own little grubby self.
I think what you're giving is the perfection of play.
Yeah.
I think in competition, here's what you described.
No, I got it.
Here's what the hunter thinks
you want to kill
when he mounts the deer, the stag, the 5-point stag on his mantle.
Yeah.
And MMA is about right here. In other words,
Okay.
it's martial. They're murderous. I think it says a lot because these guys are trained, essentially to fight to hurt.
Yeah.
And I think what it says is, I mean, it says a lot that they're able to kind of ascend toward that perfection
Okay.
briefly,
Okay.
momentarily,
Okay.
but they don't stay there.
Yeah,
And they're not happy with the play if they lose. They're going to
Yeah,
wake up in
that's
cold
right.
sweats for the rest of their lives thinking about how I should have murdered that motherfucker.
And even McEnroe was a little baby bitch who wanted attention in soccer. But I have to say, maybe I'm a sap. I have to say, Borg seemed almost like a holy man who had no interest in harming or putting down or standing over McEnroe, but just for the excellent plays.
Well, that's probably true. And this may be the reason you and I never played sports beyond high school. But the guys that are better, they at least in the United States, they're killers.
Killer instinct, yeah.
I remember Dad
That's
telling me
fair.
that Magic Johnson with his beautiful smile and Isaiah Thomas, who smiled less often, but was a very articulate guy and fun to listen to talk about basketball, that they were killers.
Yeah.
And there was this one
That's good.
playoff
That's right.
game or playoff series between the Lakers and the Pistons. This is the National Basketball Association, if you don't follow this kind of stuff. And this is years ago. They were, real vicious rivals, but everyone knew that they were friends off the court. And so before the game, Johnson, who's like this 6'9" guy, and Thomas, who's probably, a shrimp like me, 6'1", before the game, before they did the jump ball, they would go over and they would actually kiss each other on the cheek.
Wow.
It was astonishing. Funny, partly it's because Johnson had to reach down so far to kiss Thomas. And then sometime in one of those games after the smooch, Thomas did something to Magic, and I forget what it was, but it pissed Magic off.
Yeah.
And so then, like, the next opportunity it's just one of those things that the best players, like, an opportunity like that presents itself, that you can take your revenge and get away with it.
Yeah.
He's driving down the key toward the basket, and Thomas happens to be the only guy back defending. And he's, at this moment, you're like, okay, Thomas is a killer and a supreme athlete, but compared to Johnson, he was small. And so you could tell or you were wondering what was going to happen. And Johnson, instead of just going up and laying the ball over him, and maybe bumping him with his body, he runs up and you're Thomas, and he lifts up his foot and he just goes pop in like that and slams him like out of the court and then puts the ball in.
Nice.
So he could have scored without totally creaming his pal, like his best friend in the league, not on his team, and he did it. So these guys really are killers, and it's like they can't be as good as they are if they're not actually trying in their minds to kill the other guy. And that's not that's not a combat sport, but in a way it really is. And so when I saw that, I finally believed my dad, and I said, "Oh, you're right. He's literally a killer. Like if he had some reason to, if those guys had some reason to kill you, they could do it." And they get into the kind of predatory mindset. And so I think it probably is significantly evolutionary. And anyway, I'm not trying to go too far over it. I do think that they appreciate the joy. I know back to Borg and McEnroe. Borg and McEnroe had these great matches, and McEnroe was more of a prick and a baby, and he would complain to the referee, and he would interrupt the flow of the game, just like when I'm interrupting you, giving your lecture, throwing you off, and he would get an advantage. And McEnroe would find a way of causing an antagonism with the referee, and he could somehow use that anger or that sense of injustice, I think it was. I mean, that's why football players and everybody say the whole world was against us, even if they're totally popular. Like I think Coco Graf won her first major, and she said, nobody thought I could do it. And I was like, the whole world thought you could do it, and we're hoping you could do it. But they internalized that injustice, and so he would elevate his play after he had a scuffle with the ref and he felt abused. And Borg probably stale for having watched him, bitch for 5 minutes, didn't play that well. So anyway, McEnroe, I think most people would say, and I think the stats would bear this out, had the edge against Borg, who was the all-time great to that moment. And it was partly because of the moxie, partly because of the dickishness and, predatoriness, at least insofar as you can have that in tennis. But having said that, McEnroe is one of the biggest defenders of Borg. And some people say, and I hate to say this because it seems so unfair, that McEnroe ran Borg out of the game because he didn't play until ripe old age. He played, he was on top, and then McEnroe took a spot, and then he exited pretty shortly thereafter. But I'm pretty sure I've heard McEnroe defend him and say, no, that's not true. He should not say that about Borg. He was the true competitor, one of the best competitors I ever played against. So that's the point where you can come down because you're not in the ring anymore.
See, that was perfectly exact. That's the power of distinction and sophistication. I mean, it was not what the way you identified a higher level and a lower level. No, that's important. You're being adequate to the phenomena in a way that Aristotle always insisted upon.
Thanks very much.
And I will add a couple things, 3 things. Weren't Isaiah Thomas on the Pistons then?
Yeah.
And weren't 2 of his teammates, Bill Lambier and Rodman?
Yep, they were the bad boys.
And those guys were gangster in a real way. Like I do think that some of the stuff that, first of all, they were trying to kill Jordan, and they were so, back then the referees were more lax.
Oh,
You see the Last Dance Jordan thing?
I haven't watched it,
You've
actually.
got to watch it, because in that documentary, they show how Lambier and Rodman and Isaiah
And
Thomas.
Rick Mahorn was even bigger than Lambier.
Jesus. Well, I mean, they were explicitly out to really physically harm Jordan.
Because that's the only way to win, they thought.
That's right. And this was explicit, right? And
Yeah,
that
it was a game plan.
there, I have to admit, that when McGregor, sincerely, lovingly, "You're my brother," touches the glove, it's a different affair. It's a bit lower. Another example, at least to mind, is that show Justified, the TV show.
Yeah, right.
Raylon. Raylon Gibbons was best friends with Boyd Crowder in Appalachia while their daddies ran drugs. Raylon's daddy beat the shit out of him every day, and so Raylon acquired a distaste for his daddy and for crime, became a U.S. Marshal, and found himself required to put his old buddy with whom he dug coil into jail. And so he came to Boyd and basically said, it was Raylon's habit to give gun thugs until noon tomorrow, like in the Old West, a showdown, or else I'm going to get you. And Boyd knew that Raylon had recently done that, given a gun thug in Miami 24 hours to get out of town, otherwise, trouble. And the show is called Justified, I think, because Raylon takes himself to be a righteous person, a justified person, who puts criminals in jail and doesn't discriminate between strangers and family. So he's this righteous, moral guy, and he's even going to put his childhood best buddy down. And yet Raylon has acquired a reputation for somehow, very often getting those criminals in his charge killed. And what he always says is, they pulled first. I put them down, but it was justified. And he says that to his former wife, and she turns to him and he says, the question of the show, the question for Raylon and those who love him and those who hate him becomes, is he really justified? Or is he in fact avenging himself against his daddy and the criminal culture that caused him to suffer? So it's kind of a Protestant, question where you're just, but here's the point.
You got way more on that show than I ever did.
Well, that's what the first frankly, the first two episodes are clearly thinking about that. Not any of the other episodes in any of the, But look, at one point, Boyd says to Raylon, "What if I would say to you that you need to get out of town before noon tomorrow? I'll come looking for you." And Raylon says, "Now we're talking." Right?
Yeah, that's exactly
That's the shit.
Yeah.
All right, one more thing.
Alphas want to face off against alphas.
I keep saying stuff like, I keep using these somber, dire phrases, like I don't know, I can't remember. But the point is, I want to give a nod to Joe with his comments about joy and bliss and play. Because, not only because there are super profound versions of it, but because there's an utter value to the less heavy versions. And at one point in a great book by a guy named Matt Crawford, conservative guy, he says, with Aristotle and as against this Darwinian mentality that everything you do serves your own survival, or the satisfaction of your appetites, which in turn serves your survival. Everything is a kind of selfish calculation. It's not even that, because the truth is that to calculate your own interest requires consciousness and intentionality and some kind of aim. What's going on in the biological sphere when this or that species is preserved does not involve consciousness or intentionality or decision. The beast is not saying, "Wow, resources are scarce, competition is tough. I better step up my game and involve some wings or something." It is nothing of the kind. Darwin insists it's automatic, mindless, without volition. So it's a stupid way to think about human beings. At one point, Crawford says in the book, if Darwin were to watch a dolphin playing, he would say, "Well, the dolphin must be doing that because it has some survival advantage." And Crawford says, "I think if you asked the dolphin would say, 'No, I don't frolic to survive. I survive to frolic.'"
Right, very good.
And that's of the essence of Aristotle and all this.
That's excellent. And people, I only learned the term recently, but now everybody is saying it, Chesterton's fence.
Never heard of it.
So G.K. Chesterton, asked Tito, says that if you come across a fence out in the middle of a field somewhere and it serves no apparent purpose, you should be very wary before you remove it, because it may in fact have a purpose. And I can't remember exactly what he says or what possible purposes the fence might have, but something like, when the seasons change, or I don't know what it was, but there might be some purpose for the fence, and you should be very wary and trustful of tradition or of the way things are before you presume that you can improve it by destroying it. So it seems to me that the materialists, or the atheists, the Darwinians, who think that evolution is everything, they seem to be performatively self-contradictory in almost everything they say, by the way, but we'll talk about that later.
I like it.
But it seems to me that when they see things like play, or when, and this is, I think Jordan Peterson has been critiquing Dawkins for this, because there are a lot of evolutionary biologists like Brett Weinstein or atheists like Douglas Murray, and I'm trying to remember who else, even to a degree, Sam Harris,
Yes.
to a very wary degree. They say, okay, look, as God seems to be dying, as Christianity seems to be waning, we see other kinds of worship rising. And Harris is probably talking specifically about forms of Islam, but others are talking about, just a kind of secularism
That's right.
that they seem to be very concerned about. And they're saying, we don't believe in any of that, but maybe we should go back to Christianity because we think things were better then. The idea is that some of the evolutionary biologists, like Weinstein, I know for sure, says, well, look, Christianity may be serving a really profound evolutionary purpose. And I think that they are, but I think that even he, despite being close, is probably failing to recognize that religion is, and I think religion is in a way that's probably underestimated, very close to play. I think there's a deep play in religion because it's relational. You're relating to God and to the world and to everything and to other people, and that. So I guess people like Weinstein might say, okay, Christianity, that was Chesterton's fence. We shouldn't have moved it because it served an evolutionary purpose. Nice. Your point about the dolphin is going beyond that, and I agree with that too. I think in a way that, it's not just that it's holding back the stampede or whatever Chesterton's fence was doing. It's leading us to the second mode of action that, as you are explaining, is true fulfillment, and it's true fulfillment for something that, as far as I could tell, for really to mean what we think it means, has to go beyond Aristotle even, because it has to go to a god.
That's right, and that's Aquinas' whole thing.
Oh, good.
Tell me, my favorite contemporary Thomist is a 20th century Canadian Jesuit named Lonergan, and it's from Lonergan that I got this phrase that Joe just used, performative self-contradiction. Would you be willing briefly to say what you meant when you said that a lot of these four horsemen are engaged in performative contradiction?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm thinking you first gave me that term years ago.
Okay.
And it was probably when I was bitching about deconstructionists like Derrida. And that's where I think when you told me before, don't be too wary of sophistication. I think it's because in literature, I just was awash in what I take to be faux sophistication.
That's right.
Like the deconstructionists. And I could go on for hours about that, but I won't. And so it seemed to me that the deconstructionists would, if you cleared away the deliberately obscure, flouncy language, that what they were really saying over and over again was language doesn't work.
Yeah.
So that's a classic example of performative self-contradiction. You're expecting someone to understand what you mean, but it's incoherent. You're using language, it works, the other person understands what you mean, and so that there's proof that it works. So you just performed your self-refutation because language, if it didn't work, then the person would have thought you wanted a sandwich. So that's what's infuriating to me. And when I was thinking about when you kind of, you get to this, you get beyond these kind of self-satisfied sophistication, then you become C.S. Lewis, who will explain that. And he won't use terms like performative self-contradiction. He'll use a term that you also have used. You say, aren't you sawing off the branch on which you're sitting?
That's right.
You see that, and then it's literature. It's a figure of speech. You see a person on the branch. You see him sawing. He's going to fall. The idea is that the trunk is here and you're sawing here. So as soon as you get done sawing, you're going to fall, like Wile E. Coyote. And that just, to me, makes it so much more graspable. You literally visualize it, but it brings the concept with it.
That was so flipping good. Now look,
you do the evolution though.
Yeah, but can I do it?
No, absolutely, go for it. I wasn't sure what I was going to say.
Well, I'm not sure what I'm going to say, but right. When folks attempt to understand human life in Darwinian terms, evolutionary terms, they are, at least in one way, clearly guilty of performative contradiction. That is, of affirming in their very performance what they verbally deny. Cutting off the branch on which they sit. How so? Look, if everything in the biosphere, including what they take to be the human being, is doing what it does for one reason and one reason alone, that it serves, what would we say? I mean, it's complicated. Like, I think it's actually Darwin does not take any beasts to be, as I recall from reading Origin of Species, Darwin does not take any beasts, any beings in the biosphere, to be aiming to perpetuate the species. They're only aiming to satisfy their lusts and appetites. But still, the rather structuralist explanation of why natural beings do what they do, according to Darwin, goes like this. they do whatever they do for the sake of perpetuating the species or for the sake of survival. I think it's actually just satisfaction of lusts. But anyhow,
Well, as they satisfy their desires, it's just some species
that's right.
happen
That's right.
in so doing, they happen to survive better
right.
or more effectively than the other strand that didn't have that mutation. So
That's right.
there's no will, there's no
That's
desire, there's
right.
no thought of the next
Right.
generation. It's
Act-
just instinct and following, whatever will. It's I mean, talk about means to an end. I mean, it's not even.
That's right.
I mean, their means. I don't. Yeah, it's only that first mode. It's just hungry, eat. Right.
That's right. Thank you, God. Thank you.
In,
So look, for kids who don't know out there, what drives so-called evolution? That's a bad word because it suggests development unto some term or standard. It's not. What drives it is the completely meaningless and purposeless three-step of natural selection. That too is a really misleading term because it sounds like there's this Mother Nature consciously, intentionally
Right.
selecting or choosing this species for perpetuation and that one not. Nothing of the kind. All right, what happens in natural selection is what Joe just said. Number one, a random or chance mutation in an organism happens to occur. It's just random, meaningless, purposeless. It's accident. Number two, that the sprouting of that freak feature just happens as a matter of dumb luck to serve that beast. To put him in a position better than are his competitors for survival, and number three, in the very long run, that beneficial trait is passed on to progeny. So, as I recall from 40 years ago, Lord have mercy, when I read Darwin's Origin of Species, he gives two examples, both one of which is real, if you like, something about a wolf in Canada. These aren't Galapagos examples. He says, look, consider this fiction. When you look at a giraffe, you think, wow, long neck, spots, tiny little head, quirky animal, beautiful. Nature's got a sense of humor, doesn't she? Or God certainly created the species of giraffe, the kind of thing that is a giraffe, because God's joyous and has a sense of humor. There's some purpose, some meaning to it. Darwin says, no, look, no evidence for that in biology. That reeks of telos. To the contrary, here's what happened. Here's what may have happened to illustrate the point. Maybe once upon a time, all giraffes, again a matter of random chance, had short necks, but then a freak was born, and as it happened, that long neck put him in position to reach up to the better fruit higher in the trees, enabling him to have better odds of survival than his short-necked competitors. That freak feature was passed on, and in the wildly long run, long neckedness came to be a feature of giraffe, but it wasn't dictated by God. It wasn't it's not written in the sky or anything of the kind. The engine of that so-called evolution or development is chance or dumb luck, and that's the social Darwinists, as I understand it, of which Darwin was himself not one. Social Darwinists said, yeah, and that's how it is in human affairs too. It's randomness or we're lusty beasts who want to satisfy our appetites for sex, sleep, murder, whatever, the avoidance of death. We're these stimulus response machines who can't but do what we do. What do? We satisfy pleasures, desires, and some of them through, again, chance operating in concert with given environmental conditions, like good fruit being up high in a tree, happen to result in this or that species being preserved and others falling away. It's all the matter. It's randomness, chance, dumb luck. Welcome to the modern world, folks, in which you inhabit a meaningless universe with no purpose. Thank God we got past that dumb shit Aristotle. No, Darwin was a deist. He believed in a creator God, a watchmaker God. He just didn't believe in a personal God whose hand was
okay.
He was a deist, not a theist. He didn't think that there was any. God's like a watchmaker who makes a clock according to necessary, sorts of operation, and then abandons it. He doesn't love it, he doesn't care about it, he certainly doesn't have his providential hand in history. All right, look, one last point about the Darwin business. Why is a Darwinian account of human being performatively contradictory? Here's why. If you really think that not just, seals and wolves, but human beings do what they do, because the engine of their operation is natural selection, or because the life world in which they run is governed by natural selection. If you do think that that's all that's going on, if in some, you do think that everything a life form does is, to put it loosely and misleadingly, for the sake of the perpetuation of the species, then your own production of a theory of evolution to that effect is one that you have performed, not because it's true or because you think you've gathered enough evidence for it, but because, true or false, with or without evidence, it serves your your perpetuation.
Yep.
In other words, Darwinian evolution, by its own account, can't be true. It must itself be something whose value does not go beyond, Joe and I would say, lust satisfaction, or appetitive satisfaction. Most folks would, I think, fallaciously say, perpetuation of the species.
And at least it doesn't. I'm not sure that. I'm not sure. Well, I'm just not sure that you couldn't be aware of the truth of the theory. But I think you wouldn't have any right to be proud of it. You wouldn't have any right to think that it was superior morally to have it right than to have it wrong. Because truth is a value, and it seems to me that's the petard that Harrison, the atheists, are hoisted on. I think these people they're good men, meaning they are pursuing the good in the best way they can. And the four horsemen of the apocalypse, the atheists, they're pursuing truth because they think truth matters. And I haven't read their books, so I don't know, but I haven't heard them say anything that makes me think that they could get out of this challenge, which is, why does truth matter? Why is truth important? Why is truth better than falsehood? Why do you care so much? And I would say, well, because it's written into you. It's, forget the language you use, but it's part of your, it's what's propelling you towards your telos, that you're returning to, the truth, the beauty, and the goodness from which you came, and that's why it matters to you. Now, they would, of course, despise that whole thing because it's so theological, but it does seem, I just don't see how you get to right and wrong without some sort of transcendent ground, and I'm probably being imprecise in my adjective there, but ultimately, it seems to me it goes back to God.
Yeah, I think that's too strong for me. I would want to say, I would want to avoid saying that these are ways in which we just happen to be hardwired, or that this is just the nature of human operation cognitively and morally. I agree with everything you said, but I would want to say that make the stronger claim that it's incoherent to suppose otherwise, and not just for human beings. It's incoherent, period, to suppose otherwise. It's a stronger claim, and we can talk about it on some other podcast. But but since I do think I think what I just said, I would want to say that the Darwinian theory can't be true, right? Because the condition of your arriving at it and affirming it as true is that it isn't something which you're programmed to come up with. Objectivity is tied. Look, if
what aren't you programmed to come up with? What was the it?
Theory. In other words, if
the Darwinian theory,
right? If animals do what they do because they can't do otherwise, right? And this is characteristic of us too, right? Because it's simply a scientific fact about the kinds of animal that we are, that we're governed by natural selection. Then anything we do is entirely explicable by the fact that we couldn't do otherwise. But the capacity, the condition of getting something right, the condition of getting at a truth, is that you could have failed. But instead you judiciously and correctly assessed the adequacy of the evidence and so on. Right. There's no such behavior in a human being, according to the Darwinian theory. It's just stuff that looks like that, but is in fact just hardwiring response to stimulus.
Oh, I see. Okay, that's different. Yeah. Incidentally, I think I admire the guys we're talking about. I admire Brett Weinstein quite a lot. So I don't know if I said that before, but
no, I agree.
And he did recently in a very recent podcast, and I forget which one. Didn't think we were going to talk about it, where he was talking about evolution in a way that was more complex than I knew. Yeah. So I don't think I gave anything like a complete account. And I also saw on a totally different podcast. I didn't even know. I could fish it up anyway. Some guy's challenging evolution just on the basis of mathematical or statistical improbability, saying that if you calculate the way in which simply random mutation could have gotten you from point A to point B, especially in a particular, very ancient primordial period. I forget what it's called. Anybody who knows evolution would be able to pick it up. But apparently there was some evolutionary period where there was just a really rapid acceleration of or appearance of species. And they're saying, look, if you do the math on that, even if you use the numbers that are most charitable to the theory, you just don't get anywhere near that kind of change if it's random. And they're absolutely, none of them were saying anything about intelligent design. They were just doing what scientists do. And they were all, I think, evolutionary types biologists, and they were just saying, look, there's
That's
something
right.
that we don't know yet. There's something to this.
That's
So,
what Sloan was trying to show us in the Great Books, in the natural science class in the Great Books program at Notre Dame.
is that right?
Didn't he line up all these fossils and help you identify the gaps? Not because he was a design theorist who wanted to adduce God as the God of the gaps as cause, but simply to point out that it seems quite unlikely that such a gap could be there.
I've been eager to learn about this for a long time. I just haven't had a chance to do it.
Yeah.
But it does seem to me I mean, again, like what the people who challenge evolution say does seem to me really potent. But then the scientists who know evolution inside and out always say, no, there are no gaps in the fossil record.
Right.
And that's as far as I've gone. So
Me
I just
too,
don't
me
know.
too.
I just don't know if it's true or not. It'd be fascinating to talk to somebody who could take you through it and say, okay, here's
Yeah.
a challenge made by Sloan or the intelligent design
Right.
people, and here's how they're wrong.
Yeah.
Because I mean,
Yeah.
there's nothing. I have absolutely no interest in overturning evolution
Right.
as a phenomenon any more than I have an interest
Right.
in overturning the theory of the circulation of the blood or photosynthesis.
Right.
It doesn't
Perfect.
seem to me at all in conflict with God, and it doesn't
Yes.
to Pope Pius, whatever, the early
Right.
20th century,
Right.
when he said, "But the encyclical is truth
Absolutely.
cannot contradict truth." Right. So
And I might have misspoken before. I think I said something like, one can show that the Darwinian theory of evolution is inadequate because it's performatively contradictory. That's a flat misstatement of mine if I made it. What I would say is that while as far as I know, the Darwinian theory of evolution is entirely characteristic of us as bodies. It covers our biological operation, but that does not cover, much less govern our conscious intentional operation, which is at a different level. Now, long story, but the point is, yes, I don't have any, as far as I know, I don't have any what the stuff you say might be right. I'd be happy if it were, but I even if I assume that whatever the latest in modern science is the most likely to be true, it still seems to me that it doesn't and can't function as a complete explanation of the human, since there are things in the human that rise above the level of physiological process.
yeah,
Big talk.
right.
Hey, we got to quit. You got to go teach. But can I quickly finish up my 2 points in Aristotle?
We have plenty of time.
All right. So I told you who Aristotle was briefly. I told you about these two kinds of action. I opined that the lesser kind runs the show in the Western world today, much to the detriment of folks, even if they naturally or instinctually know that the second kind is fundamental and not actually a matter of arbitrarity or mechanism. Fourth point, what Aristotle calls virtue, arete, what you and I would call good character, is foundational for engaging in the second kind of action, right? People don't use that word virtue anymore. It's fallen out of fashion. In the 19th century, people, of course, still spoke of a woman's virtue, chastity, by which they meant that a virtuous woman or a woman of good character didn't sleep around, and a virtuous man did. Charming double standard, but now, as you once put it, the whole sexual morality boat has sailed, and the word is absent from any kind of parlance. So you have to go back, but there's this word virtue in Aristotle. It means good character, and you have to cultivate it if you want to engage in the intrinsically valuable actions that will bring you to term. Right. So let me tell you how he thinks we have to go about achieving virtue, good character, and let me give you a number of examples.
Good.
Virtue for Aristotle, good character, is a mean between extremes of vice, neither over nor underdoing some point of good character. So Aristotle's big example is courage. You can't have a good life for the Greeks without courage. And Aristotle says most people think they know what it means. It means not pussing out, not kowtowing, not quailing or caving. It means standing up in the face of adversity. And Aristotle says F. That's certainly right, but it's only half of it. So imagine for me, if you will, a single sheet of paper with three columns, vertical columns, virtue column in the middle, and then on either side of that middle column, vice columns. Let's let the vice column on the left represent the vice or bad character that you sink into if you underdo the virtue listed in the middle, and let's let the vice column on the right represent the vice or bad character that you sink into if you overdo the point of good character in question. So Aristotle will say, can't we all agree that courage is a virtue? It's a part of good character. Yes. What does it entail? It certainly can be underdone. You can certainly fail to muster enough courage, in which case you sink into the vice of cowardice. And it is, courage is tough. The older I get, the more I come up with excuses for not mustering physical courage when it's required, and so on. Kid myself that it's not worth it or something of the kind. So it's very familiar to me lately, especially, that one can fail to muster enough courage. One can underdo the virtue of courage, and in that way sink into the vice of cowardice. And everyone sees that. But it's only half the story, hence the F. You can err in an equal, if opposite direction, by overdoing courage, and then you twist the virtue of courage into the vice of rashness or recklessness. At my old school, we all knew guys who would get in fights, fist fights at the bar every weekend, and those guys were not cowards. It is no small thing to muster the physical courage required to face up to some guy who's going to break your nose. But that doesn't mean, those guys do not have courage for Aristotle. They are half-baked because they're regularly engaging in reckless or rash behavior. It is, I'm sure Aristotle will say there is never a good reason to get in a fist fight with a guy in a bar. Why? Because he doesn't like, he's a fan of the Vikings instead of the Packers, or because he said something about your girlfriend. You could kill him. He could kill you. He could sue you. You could let down your wife and kids. Because in your stupid, reckless, rash behavior, you got into a fight in a bar. All right, pick your own example. But the point is, courage is not just one thing, avoiding cowardice. It's also avoiding rashness or recklessness. And it's very tough to strike the mean, very tough to hit the bullseye, very tough in this life to consistently find a middle path between two extremes of vice, in this case, cowardice or rashness. Most of us, most of the time, depending upon our liabilities, are erring in one direction or the other. If you're an effete old talking head like me, you're rarely going to be entering into rash or reckless behavior because you're so scared and feeble. On the other hand, if you're a barrel-chested young man who's pissed off for some good reasons, your liability is going to be to overdo it, and you will fail just as much as the coward. So it's tough to cultivate virtue. But boy, if you get better and better at striking the mean over the course of your life, can't you agree, Aristotle would say, that you have become more fully and deeply human? And that doesn't mean, feeling happy in the sense of chipper. In fact, the more virtuous you get, the probably less well people will think of you, because cowards will think that you're a fool ever to stand up, and reckless types will think what they think. I hate to say it, but it seems to me that a number of the famous colonels about whom we've made movies in the history of the United States have been barrel-chested guys who were beloved because they were closer to rashness and recklessness than cowardice. What does a general have to do? A general has to, or a colonel Lahr has to decide whether to send the young people in his charge, his troops, into harm's way. And you can definitely imagine him cowing, failing to send his troops into harm's way when he should, because he, thinks about how so many of them will not be sent home to their families and children. He can fail to send them when the conditions require it. On the other hand, you can imagine how he could recklessly play fast and loose with their lives by sending them in when it wasn't necessary, right? He might get a lot of play on TV for being a tough mofo who doesn't ever stand down, but and so he might feel chipper all the time because his vanity has been flattered, and he can strut and be macho, and everyone will love him. And many a male movie star, of course, has made a career out of being loved for his recklessness or rashness. So what's the point? The greater happiness, or eudaimonia, that will become yours in the course of your life, in accordance with how virtuous you become, is something more like being comfortable in your own shoes, or having a deep down sense of value or worth, or even self-respect. And you might be much more criticized by people from all sides if you are a better person, a virtuous person. But it would be worth it, right? That's the argument. Any quick comments about that, Mike?
Just, it's exactly the exact reaction I had before when I talked about the two-step with Aristotle. The first thing, years, well, that's simple, I already know that. And then you realize, no, that's so important.
Yeah.
And what I'm thinking is, it's so important. I'm a great books guy, you're a philosophy guy. We think that you need, maybe this fits in with your second mode of action, we need to go through the cycle again and again and again. You're always relearning the most important things. You don't learn them once and then put them on the shelf. If you do that, they're on the shelf. You're not putting them to practice very likely. Right. And so to learn this, simple, brilliant, and ultimately meta sophisticated view that there's a golden mean,
That's right.
and that you can be a chicken, you can be a coward, but you can be a reckless fool. You can be humorless and sterile, or you can be a buffoon.
Yes.
But you want to try to find that golden mean, and that's the way of slaloming towards
That's right.
your best self and being. What are we calling the second mode of action?
I haven't named it.
Okay.
And I don't want to give the Greek words because I'm pretty sure I misunderstand.
Okay. Well, the one that we'll take. How about eudaimonic?
Yeah.
I don't want to ask you about that now, but it
Yeah.
will next time. So keep
But
going.
it just, the typical translation is happiness. But, I think if Aristotle around, he would say, but look, modern people don't misunderstand.
Yeah.
Number one, the right translation would be something more like thriving or flourishing than happiness, because happiness for us sounds like being chipper.
That's really good.
And you may often not feel chipper if you're a good person.
Thriving, flourishing. It's somewhere between happiness, which almost sounds. Well, I mean, you're saying it could sound chipper or superficial, but it could also sound completed.
That's what it is.
And I'm
Yes.
thinking of Goethe's Faust, where the magic word is striving.
Yes.
And so, if you're a human being that's not striving,
That's
as
right.
the other great ancient Hebrew philosopher Woody Allen said that if the shark isn't swimming, it's a dead relationship.
We have on our hands a dead shark.
Shark.
Yes, and I think Aristotle even somewhere says that at best, you and I would include in this life. He doesn't include that. At best, we asymptotically approximate the golden mean.
That's Goethe. That's Faust. Yeah.
Awesome.
Another
But you
podcast.
can see how all this stuff is preparing. I mean, look, if you're a believer, you're going to say, "Do you see how God placed seeds of the coming of Christ in the ancient Greeks?" And if you're a modern, you're going to say, "I know." But the fact is that lots of Christianity grew out of this, as you can tell. It requires a whole nother extension. But all right, another virtue. I'll do two more because these are these are surprising. Anger. Anger is a virtue for Aristotle. There are some things in response to which you should get angry. And if you don't, that's a deficiency. That's a vice. So if something happens about which you ought to be righteously, not self-righteously angry, but righteously angry, and you can't get angry, that's a vice. Now, who knows what your biography is, what your psychology is. There could be an explanation and exculpation, but that aside, it's not good to be timid. It's not good to underdo the virtue of anger. Likewise, or in an equal if opposite way, you can overdo it. You can be too quick to anger, and then you twist the virtue of anger not into the vice of timidity, but into the vice of churlishness. There's some funny words here. Churlishness. We all know people who are quick to fly off the handle, easily pissed off. Aristotle amusingly. No, I'm sorry, it's not churlish. It's irascibility. Aristotle.
Oh, yeah.
You sink into the vice of irascibility.
Ire, too much ire.
Excellent.
Prone to ire.
Excellent.
Choleric or choleric, as Shakespeare would talk about it in the Elizabethan physiological theory of the humors, where you're four different fluids, literally fluids in your body. If you have too much of one, you have an imbalance.
Yeah.
You're too much. You tend toward what that fluid inspires. So Hotspur in Henry IV Part 1 is choleric because he's too quick to anger. Falstaff is sanguine. He's got too much blood, and the people that have too much blood are happy and like to drink, and so because they're sanguine, that's why their noses are red. So Santa Claus was too sanguine. Hal, the hero of the story, is what Shakespeare, I think, would call well commeddled, which means well mixed. That actually comes from Hamlet, where Hamlet tells Horatio, he says, "Look, you're the only dude around here who's not imbalanced. You are well tempered, right? So to be tempered meant to be balanced, I think, and to be well mixed. I'm not sure that's quite right, but to be well commeddled meant to be well mixed, to be proportionate."
Wow, and of course, superb. Although, of course, we don't want to reduce this from a moral to a physiological matter.
Well, that's the thing, is that
The physiological comes in. We just don't, and it may be strong. We just don't want to reduce. Otherwise, we're like the contemporary psychologists who thinks that since there is no mind and free will and soul,
No, of course
happiness
not.
is
Right,
really
right.
a matter of medication.
right now, I mean, I think the theory of the humors is very limited. It's just a kind of a fun connection. The reason I said I paused is that it does seem to me that as physics gets weirder, that old questions like how this the mind controls the body or inhabits the body in the first place.
Yeah.
Those questions seem to me to be super fun, to the point I want to say stuff like, okay, if E equals mc squared, and if you can take mass and turn it into energy, then why can't you take energy and turn it into spirit?
Yep.
And then wrap around at the end, in the resurrection, when the body rises with the soul.
Wow. Look, and I have to say,
How about that?
Aristotle and Aquinas would be much closer to that than I, because for Aristotle and Aquinas, the human being is a form matter composite, but not in the way that modern philosophers meant that when they said that, you've got a soul in a body or a ghost in a machine.
Right.
For Aristotle and Thomas, they're so-called hylomorphists. The body and the mind are one. There's a distinction, and the one isn't reducible to the other, but they're utterly one in just the way that you seem to be saying. And I too often am a dualist, someone who separates mind and body. And when I said what I said about the Darwin thing, Darwin explains what's up with us biologically, but not consciously, intentionally, cognitively. That was too simple a division. So I thank you.
I just don't know any. I would love to. That's like several more podcasts. And I would love to learn about that. So I'm just shooting from the hip. But it seems to me fun to think that those old questions could be coming or could be revived. And I mean, because you think of stuff, people say stuff like, I've heard Peter Boghossian, who I kind of like. I don't think you're as big a fan, but I like him because he pushes back against the woke nonsense. But he's the kind of guy that when he's talking to a theist, will say, or a Christian, he'll say, "Do you really believe that Jesus walked on water?" And I'm thinking, dude, that is the least of the preposterous things that you believe if you have faith in the Christian God. Yeah. We believe in way crazier shit than that. Yeah. And so it's just, that's what I'd like to say to him. But I mean, walked on water? I mean, Jesus, have you seen anybody water ski? Have you seen what are those insects that literally walk across the water because of the surface tension? But you get these theories of other universes, and I just don't understand quantum mechanics or physics, and you understand it.
No,
I think,
if you think you do, you don't. They say,
Okay, well there you go. But it seems to me that if your mind can go to that place, and if you think of a lot of the things that people for forever have thought was nuts about theology or Christian theology, the idea of there being something like a heaven or a hell, and it seems to me that that's and it's not child's play, but it seems to me that it's conceivable that you could actually literally explain everything. And you could literally explain, the spirit as well as matter, as well as, anything in between. Now, I don't know anything about this. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just saying that I've heard things that makes me want to learn about that. So I'll go into it with a strong dose of humility. But to me, it's fun and invigorating.
It is, but I wouldn't go quite so far, I'm afraid, yet again, because it almost sounds like matter and spirit might turn out to be the same thing. And I would just want to say that they're probably way the hell more one than I am inclined to think, but I don't think it's even coherent to suppose that we could take one kind of explanation to explain both parts of us.
I will abide by what I said before. I don't know what I'm talking about, but I want to learn.
I went to school with Boghossian, and
you did?
and I always wonder if he's intentionally playing the fool to some degree, because he was a provocateur.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, he wrote those phony articles about, I forget what it was, dog rape or the male. Like he literally got an article, I think, accepted for publication arguing that the penis was a social construct. So you have to give him a lot of credit for having come up with that one.
I wish mine were even that.
Yeah, and something about dog rape, like in the park, if the dogs, do what dogs do, that, and somehow that's connected to men. I can't remember what it was, but it's crazy stuff. And he basically called or pulled down the pants of a lot of supposedly reputable journals. And sorry, I have to admit, I did.
Like a so-called affair or whatever.
He did the so-called, what is so-called, they call it so-called 2 or so-called squared.
Oh, really? I didn't know.
He and Helen Pluckrose, and who's the other guy? Is it Lindsay? 3 people who decided to be mischievous and naughty. And
that's hilarious. I didn't know.
I have to look into it to see, but no, because of that, I do have some respect for you, Boghossian.
All right, let me keep going.
I'm on the show.
Courage, anger, pride. Look, anger is one of the 7 deadly sins for a Christian. It's important to note the differences between the Greeks and Christians. Anger is one of the 7 deadly sins for Christians, and so I myself do think this marks an important difference between Greeks and Christians. But Jesus was often angry with Peter. He did throw the money changers out of the temple. So I would like to think that Christians can distinguish between self-righteous anger and righteous anger, and in imitating Christ, follow his example in being righteously angry. But still, man, I do think there's a difference in something between the Greeks and the Christians. The Greeks, think of all those statues, those hulking statues of Zeus and of perfect Athena. Mm-hmm. I mean, they had a high vision of the human, and Christianity wants to introduce sin and fallenness, and the idea that you're created by a God upon whom you depend 100% for your sustained existence. So different affair. You're more like a reed blowing in the wind, whereas I think Aristotle might have found Christianity even effeminate, with the turn the other cheek business.
About the different statues, and you got Zeus, who looks like the perfect Olympian Arnold Schwarzenegger, and then you've got the crucified Christ.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you said it's like a reed blowing in the wind. It's like wind nailed to the reed. I mean, that's this totally opposite conception of strength, of true strength, and it's strength through passivity, or redemption through weakness, life through death.
Man, that's fantastic. And yet we shouldn't lose sight of the affinities, right? Because in giving yourself over to the good, to trying to cultivate virtue, not simply satisfying your appetites or going in for perks or attention, you are transcending yourself in a way that is structurally similar to the self-transcendence that we engage in when we subordinate ourselves to God and Christ.
That was a lot.
Oh, too quick.
I'm going to go rewind the tape and say it. Do you want to say it again?
I'm just saying that although the Greeks and Christians are different and wonderfully exemplified by the difference between the statue of Zeus on the one hand and the statue of the crucified Christ on the other hand, the thing that they have in common, at least structurally, is that they take the human being to come to fuller life through self-sacrifice, or I just would say self-transcendence. The virtuous person is someone who subordinates his own lower interests in fame, money, satisfaction to the good, right? Cultivating virtue is a kind of self-transcendence in the same way that subordinating yourself.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what Christ is doing on the cross. He's not being weak because
That's right.
it's a virtue to be weak.
That's
it's
right.
a virtue to wear yourself down to nothing.
That's
I mean, the Kafka story, A Hunger Artist, is about what would happen if you took that imperative and made it into its own means. You made that means into its own end. We talked about fasting before. Fasting has a perfect purpose. It's for purification or for sacrifice. And the Hunger Artist, it's for entertainment. It's like Christ stripped of purpose, or stripped of telos. And at the end he says, well, why do I do this? Well, I couldn't find any food that I like. Because you shouldn't admire me.
Wow, he says that.
That's like if you take the Christian story and you shake it until the morality comes out. That's the Hunger Artist.
I didn't know that.
I mean, Christ, and this is important, Christ in Gethsemane, in the garden, before he is arrested and he knows he's going to suffer and die on the cross, he begs God, or he asks God to let the cup pass him by. He doesn't want to do that to his body. He doesn't have contempt for the body. It hurt when he got nailed through. And even when he rises, he's not free of that. He shows the stigmata. He shows the places where they nailed through his body, because the body and the soul, and I don't understand this myself, but again, something I really want to dig into. I'm up to continue to dig into. I thought about it, off and on throughout my life. You can't help it if you're a Christian or a Catholic. The insistence is that when he comes back to life, he's embodied. He's not a ghost. Thomas could put his finger through the palms and the side where the lance of Longinus struck. And I've forgotten this, but in a reading that recent Sunday, he says hello to the boys, and he says, do you have anything to eat? And they give him fish.
Oh my God.
The resurrected Christ eats fish. So the whole point of that was to try to say that I was not trying to say that the Zeus statue and the Christ statue are incompatible.
No.
In fact, I think that if you probably read them both right in the way I think you just did when you went real quick, I think they merge. Maybe not identical, but
God bless
they
you.
merge.
That was fantastic, and I'm so glad you said it. That's the point of my wife's new book. I love you, beauty, or badass. But let's keep going.
True.
That was the most important thing said in this otherwise fantastic podcast. Okay, courage, anger, pride.
Oh yeah.
Pride is, of course, the worst sin for a Christian, right? Because you are here entirely at the service of Creator God, and you have to keep your head down and be humble. And anything like pride or self-satisfaction is something at which a lot of Christians would recoil. Aristotle would say, "No, look, that's what you're mistaking pride for arrogance. Pride is just an accurate estimation of your own worth, and there's nothing good about underselling yourself. So you might you might underdo a right pride and sink into the vice of self-effacement, even though, of course, you might also overdo it, overestimate yourself, think you're something that you're not, which would be arrogant. And the Greeks would be horrified at arrogance. And they'd have a hard, at least Plato and Aristotle, I think, have a hard time looking at that. So again, maybe a difference between Greeks and Christians, but I would suspect Jesus has no interest in you selling yourself short, even though, of course, you should always watch it and mark the difference between yourself and the divine.
There's humility, and then there's false humility.
Yeah, but that's for Aristotle at least. That's it's a different virtue, but was like the photographic negative of the pride thing.
Both are self-understanding.
Say it again.
Both are on a scale of self-understanding, and if you are
that's right.
arrogant, you overestimate yourself. If you are falsely humble, you underestimate yourself.
Self-understanding. Excellent. I like it. All right, now here I'm going to say a liberal thing just to torture Joe. It occurred to me over the years that these things might in some way be keyed to culture and indeed to gender. So if I'm afraid I think that if you're in our culture, if you're a man and regularly overdo courage and overdo anger and overdo pride, we will call you a badass. Aristotle wouldn't approve. You're as much of a chump as the opposite number for Aristotle. Whereas if you're a woman and you simply get mad, when you should, we have a word for you, and it also starts with a B.
Itch.
All right. Courage, anger, pride. Okay,
That was the liberal thing?
yeah, it's my kind of feminism.
That didn't hurt at all.
Well, good. I know. I mean, it was a joke, but your machismo is just so overpowering, almost as much as mine. All right. Look, we don't have to go through all the virtues, but I'll be quick. Because, once you see Aristotle's main list, I think it'd be hard to deny that a better life would come from getting better and better at striking these means. And most commonsensical people, I think, see that, even though, so-called intellectuals have pulled the mask, think they've unmasked everything. All right. Friendship. Friendship is a virtue, but it's not easy like people think. You can underdo friendship, of course. That I think is the churlishness. You're a touchy bastard. You're prickly. I want people to stay the hell away from you. If you underdo, you can underdo the virtue of friendship, then you sink into the vice of churlishness. But of course, you can overdo it and sink into the vice of, I think Aristotle's word is ass kissing. Just kidding, sycophancy.
Well, and sorry to interrupt, but also what Augustine talks about when his friend dies,
Huh.
and he falls into despair, because even friendship is, in the Christian context, is a lesser, is not the greatest good, is a very good good. But he essentially worshipped his friend, and he says it was as if I had spilled out my soul on the sand, because I felt as if I couldn't go on without my friend.
That is much better, because there, you're right. There's an overdoing of genuine friendship, right? By comparison with divine relation, it should be lesser.
Yes.
But maybe since Aristotle, is not working with that upper register, he's thinking of an overdoing of friendship, not so much as an overdoing of genuine friendship, but as a kind of reduction of friendship or falsifying of friendship.
Oh, it's in the first mode.
Yes.
Yeah, so you can actually, according to the Christian tradition, you can sin in the second mode as well. It's we have a very demanding religion that we kind of believe in. There are crasser ways of failing or using friendship as a means to an end. Right.
So the kid who wins most friendly in the yearbook is almost certainly not possessed of the virtue of friendship, because he's indiscriminate. No matter who comes around the corner, thumbs up.
Yeah, boy, oh boy.
Okay. Not easy to be a friend, and yet everybody thinks so.
There's too much agreeability on certain college campuses.
Too
much going along to get along.
Oh, that's right. And that's another podcast, but an infinite one.
Yes.
I'm just dealing with his I suppose main list of the virtues. He's got sub lists and so on. But I'm gonna to cut even the major list short, and let me just give one more. Wit, perhaps surprisingly, is a virtue for Aristotle, and you can underdo it, you can overdo it. It's easy to see how someone could overdo it. You're a joke a minute type person, and Aristotle calls such a person a buffoon, a clown.
I was wondering who's going to look at me.
Not at all, not at all. But of course, you can underdo it too, and be the kind of person who thinks always wants to pour cold water on everybody's fun.
Totally not true, but go ahead.
A wet blanket, and then you sink into the vice of boorishness. And our beloved mom, who's a fire-breathing conservative now, but once upon a time was a sweet liberal hippie, did in my childhood a couple times say, "Oh, come on, Micah, can't we have some fun? Why do you have to be such a bore?" let that be my last remark about Aristotle. But in order to segue from this to AI, I'll say this: because it is difficult to pursue virtue, both in the secular way and in the more developed faithful way that the Christian faith requires, which we'll have to treat some other podcast. People have always been failing at it, and it's become less popular even to try. But when you add to that vice-caused diminution of the tradition, when you add to that the fact that modern science imagines it rules teleology out, and people take the implicit philosophy of modern science to be as true as the physics, which it isn't, you get a modern culture, early, late, and postmodern culture, in which there's little sympathy among educated people for teleology, hence for that second kind of action, hence for virtue, hence for a flourishing life. And people attempt to live their lives simply on the basis of calculating their own interest or finding ever more strategic or efficient ways to make good on whatever the hell ends they happen arbitrarily to have adopted. It's a bad scene. One of the things that we, all of us, spend tons of our time on is technology, right? It's by way of technology that you can amuse yourself, have more pleasure, ease the burdens of life. And natural science of the kind bequeathed to us by Galileo and Newton has been terrifically helpful in making technology all the more powerful. The modern science, unlike Aristotle's, was mathematical, mathematical physics and astronomy, and what are numbers but units of measure? And the calculus especially put the Western world in a position to terrifically accurately measure the motions of nature. If you can, with terrific accuracy, measure the motions of nature, you can control them and submit what used to be called Mother Nature to your will in a way that just made possible incredible advances in ballistics, warfare, engineering, navigating. Anywho, the latest bit of technology to have been made possible is AI. And I myself have zero objection. I mean, thank you, Jesus, for modernity with the advance of modern science. I think the philosophical cover story is false, and demonstrably so. But I have zero objections to modern science of any kind and the technologies that it makes possible. Would you like not to have running water or medicine? Who wants to turn the clock back, except for a few noble Amish who wants to turn the clock back to pre-industrial revolution society? So I myself, at least, am very grateful for modern science and the technologies it has made possible. And I think AI is incredibly impressive, amazing, astounding in the results that it can achieve and has done already and could do in the future. It could also harm us terrifically and probably will. But it's just a tool that could be put to better or poorer use. I don't have any interest in that stuff, I'm afraid. My interest in AI is only as follows. It's not I. I think it can be shown that even the most advanced and complex and powerful sorts of artificial intelligence are not uh, genuine intelligence. That's to say, I think that AI is not artificial intelligence in the sense of real intelligence contrived through artifice, but artificial intelligence in the sense of fake intelligence, not real intelligence. What is it instead? It's basically electricity acting on circuits. But technologies are incredibly powerful and to be welcomed and managed, however difficult, just like any technologies made possible by science. And yet, what I would want to insist on philosophically is that they're not actually intelligent, mostly because they're not conscious and intentional, and that instead they just simulate or mimic intelligence with potentially wonderful results. Last point. The reason I wanted to spend some time with Joe going through my reasons for thinking that artificial intelligence doesn't and indeed can't, in principle, cannot think, that's to say, operate with genuine intelligence, no matter how powerful, is degrading to think otherwise. Because in so doing, you not only reduce your picture of intelligence from the second kind of activity Aristotle identified to the first kind, which is just calculation or manipulation. And perhaps not even that. I mean, I don't even think that what's going on in machines and the programs, however advanced, I don't even think that they rise to the level of calculation. And so it's a wild reduction of something which is fundamentally characteristic of God, the angels, and human beings, but not animals. Sorry, Mariah. It's a wild reduction of that most salient feature of us to think that machines can do it. And there's the segue between Aristotle, the impoverished kind of action is what people take to be intelligence in the machines, and hence, to some degree, intelligence in themselves. And it's not the latter, and it'll harm us to think so.
That'll be the next podcast. Dude, I'm very grateful for you coming on the show. I've been trying to get his ass on the show since I started doing it, and finally I got him, and I hope there will be many more in the future.
Thank you, brother. You know how much I admire you and want to be just like you when I grow up. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, everybody. See you next time. As always, I'd like to beg, please subscribe, like, comment, or share. Get the word out about this podcast if you enjoy it.
Can I go?
Let the star of the show sit down.
Oh yeah.
Do you mind if I be on my own?
That's awesome.
See?
Where did you include that? Is that on?
Well,
that'd be great. All right.
We'll see if I include it or not, because after all, I'm the star of the show.
Yikes.